Hey everybody, welcome to module number 6. Let's take a look at what we got going on here because I think that this is probably, of all 8 modules, this is probably the big one right here, the one that we really need to focus on. Up through this point, you've been doing all the research, you've been doing all the planning, you've been thinking about what you want to argue and how you want to argue, and using the research to kind of get yourself into that position to be ready to tackle the writing. This is where you're actually going to do it, and you're going to draft your essay. Now, one of the things I would really like to impress upon you is that the better of a job you can do here, the easier it becomes for the last 2 modules, right? It's not to say that this essay is going to be perfect the first time through, but you really want to approach it as I need to make this a solid draft. I know sometimes I'll get papers or I'll talk to students and they'll be like, oh, yeah, I just put something together. I'll fix it in the draft. I'll get some feedback and I'll fix it there. That's true. That's part of the process. But what happens then is you have a much different starting point, right? So if you really put in a lot of time and a lot of effort and you really make this a solid draft, you're starting here and then trying to make it over here. Whereas if you just slap something together, you're way over here and you got to make all that distance back up, right? So this is really where you need to really do some focusing, right? And again, this is probably the most consequential module because this is where we actually pull everything together to see what we have to work for toward the end, right? So we start with our overview of what we've got going on here, and again, our objectives. And then we take a look again at this activities list, the things that you're going to be doing. It gives you the list of what you will be working on. This developing thesis statement, this is really an important piece because this is the controlling idea. I know a lot of times people will say, what's a thesis statement? It's a 1-sentence statement of purpose, right? It tells the audience what they're getting ready to expect. But I think it also works a lot for you as the writer because once you create the thesis statement, this is the controlling idea, right? So that when the reader looks at this, they know, okay, here's what the essay is going to be about. But for you, the writer, anything you want to bring in, you could be able to look back at that thesis and say, does this fit? Does this support this thesis? Does it build upon that idea, right? So not only is it something that the reader is going to look at and say, okay, here's what I'm getting, but it really for you is a measuring stick. It's a controlling statement that really hopefully keeps you on track throughout, right? So there's a lot of different things that you're going to get in this thesis statement piece here. You'll learn a lot about thesis statements. There is no one way to do these. A couple things that I will point out. Obviously, we're not going to use the first person, right? I've written that in many of your papers. And I keep reminding you of that again and again. It's that tone, right? Your thesis statement, it is your statement. It is your belief, but you don't need to say it out loud, right? You don't need to say like, I believe. It's your paper. We just assume that, right? I think something else to think about with a thesis statement is that we don't want to announce my paper will be about, or this paper will argue, right? Like we don't need to do that because again, the thesis statement, that's what it is. So it's kind of stating the obvious. I think also too, you want to be careful that your thesis statement doesn't like challenge the reader. Like in this paper, I will blank. Well, what you're doing is you're trying to tell the reader, or in a way, you're telling the reader, prove to me I didn't, right? So again, it's a statement of belief. It's a preview of what you're getting ready to read. It builds some of that context for that statement of belief, right? So avoid the first person. We don't use the first person. And then really try to avoid just stating out loud what the thesis statement is. Because again, that's what it does. That's what we expect it to do. And then there's some information about organizing the argument, pre-writing and organizing and outlining. Again, I'm not going to say there's any one way to pre-write. There are many different ways to pre-write. all of us do it differently. I do it different ways depending on what the assignment is, right? Like if it's a small in class, read this and respond, 2 pages, I'll probably just start typing, right? If it's a longer paper, something that I'm going to spend a lot of time on, coming back and forth, into, then I'm going to do a lot more pre-writing because I need to organize my thoughts, right? So I really do believe that the more you can pre-write, the more you can organize, the more you can plan your paper, the better off you are, especially because you're going to be doing it over the stretch, right, of a couple of weeks. That gives you a lot of kind of structure to work from. But you'll get a lot of information in there, and then your to-do list of what to do, what you need to be working on, um, and then this down here, and I'll look at this in just a second with you. That you're going to submit a first or a rough draft, but you're also going to submit a copy of that draft to be peer reviewed and peer edited, right? So you'll actually submit this rough draft twice. Let's take a look at our discussion board for this week, or for this module. Again, we're going to do it in 2 stages, right? We're going to do it in 2 stages. You have your initial post, and then you have your replies. You're going to reply to at least 2 of your classmates, okay? You will notice at this time, the timing on this one is a little bit different just because we have Easter Sunday to work around. So your initial post needs to be up by April the 1st. And that again, normally be that Sunday, but that's Easter Sunday, so I'm just going to push it back a week. That really doesn't mean a lot for you, but what that does mean is it's one less day to do your responses. Also, too, think about this. You're going to want to get onto this one pretty quickly because roughly, when you get, kind of through this first week of the module into the second week, that's when you're going to be doing your review, your rough draft, right? And so you're really going to want to get this done and out of the way so you can really focus on the rough draft. So your initial post is where you're going to write 2 possible thesis statements for your argument, okay? But you're going to write them, one in support of and one supporting the opposite or an opposing viewpoint, right? Remember, we talked about like an argument before it can be a valid argument. There needs to be a valid other argument, right? Like you can't argue that breathing is good because there's no alternative, right? Like you got to breathe, right? So there's no, like, you can't, like, not breathing is good. It doesn't work that way, right? And what you're going to do then is you're also going to format it in this IMPA meme format, right? And that's where your claim is directly related to the reasons, okay? Or this, I believe X because of Y, that real basic format, right? So they give you some examples down here, right? Like here's a weak one. I believe I should get an A because I tried hard. Well, yes, I mean, that is a position and that is a reason, but does that really prove your point? Does that really give your reader something to buy into, right? Like, I want to believe this, but I got to believe these reasons so that I can believe your position, right? So a stronger one is I believe I should get an A because I followed all the directions, I submitted all the work, and I received 90% on all the scores. So these are things that we can buy into and believe in, right? And evaluate and critique, right? So you're going to create your 2, and then you're asked to reflect on this, right? Reflect on this. And then they give you a list of these questions to be thinking about. So we have these 2 statements, and then we have your reflection, what you believe, right? Now, I think that when you look at these questions, these are deceptively easy. Which is easier for you and why? Like, oh, number 1 was because it was what I believe, right? Well, yeah, but you're going to have to build on that. You're going to have to expand on that. You're going to have to prove your point, right? I know it looks deceptively easy because the questions are pretty straightforward, but you have to justify them. You have to explain it. You have to back up your claims. Once you get down to your responses, again, you're going to do 2 of them. You're going to respond to at least 2 of your classmates. We want to be very detailed, very substantive. We want to be very direct, and we look at specifics. Like in this, you said, and I believe whatever, right? So you really want to make sure that you're really focusing in on that. And remember, this isn't like your position is bad because, right? Like we're going to avoid arguing the topics. We're really wanting to focusing on your thesis statement really worked because your thesis statement didn't work very well because I couldn't buy into those positions, or those were really weak kind of arguments. They didn't really show why you felt that way, right? Like we want to deal with the thesis statements and the justifications, not the arguments or the positions to begin with. All right, and then we're going to look at the rough draft here. Okay, and again, this is, like I said, this is the place where the rubber meets the road. This is the thing we've been working up to, right? I know this isn't the final draft. I know that there's a final draft due later, and that's worth all these points and whatever, right? I totally get that. But this is the draft, right? Like this is like, hey, here's what I got. And then I'm going to give you feedback on that, and you're going to get peer feedback on that, and you're going to use those things to improve your work, to better your work, right? So if you don't have a lot of really good material to work with, you're going to get really bad feedback, or weak feedback. You're going to be feedback on weak pieces, right? But then you have to make this leap. You have to keep going all the way forward, right? And so you really want to put the effort in this. You really want this to look good. You really want this to be outstanding work, right? Again, when we look at this, we have all kinds of informations for you, so you know what you need to be doing and how you need to do this. You are arguing to convince, and remember that is, here's the position and why. I'm trying to get you to believe this. I'm trying to get you to buy into this. I'm trying to get you to come to my side, right? Remember, that's your purpose. I know a lot of times, we talk about different types of arguments, and it's like, you're just trying to define something, or you're trying to explain something, right? This is to convince. So you're trying to get the audience to change their position, modify their position, adapt their position to you. Some things that I really want to impress upon you, and things that we've talked about all through this semester, and you've seen these comments on your papers. Tone, 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 tone. I cannot say it enough. Avoid the first and second person, right? We don't need those here, right? Don't use I, me, we, us. We don't need any of those. Avoid the you, right? Because again, we don't need to, we don't want to act like or sound like we're talking directly to the audience, right? Like we're sitting at the table and talking to them directly. Okay. I could see a situation in which you use those first or second persons in a very limited sense in the introduction or in the conclusion. I think if you limit it to that for a very specific reason, you might have some justification there, but really we want to avoid that. Another thing to think about that I've made some comments on people's papers is just typing as if you were talking, right? Every now and then I'll get a paper that says, now, as you can see, or another point that I would make is, or moving on to, like we again, the paper is not read, out loud. This isn't a speech. So we want to avoid it making it sound like you're talking, right? Some other things to be thinking about, paragraphing, right? So obviously each paragraph is one main point, right? Now it can be pretty detailed. That's cool. But when you start off with that topic sentence, that's what the paragraph should be about, right? So when you get a new topic, then you bring up a new paragraph. So if you start talking about like the cost of this and how much it's costing and what the societal costs are, and then how does that impact future generations? Well, that future generations then might be the place to start a new paragraph. I think something too also to think about is really long paragraphs. I know that it might just be one big piece and it might all be, grammatically correct and, to have it in one paragraph. But really long paragraphs, like a page long, can sometimes be a little overwhelming for your reader. And so, is there a place that you can naturally make that break? Other things to think about. Obviously, a really strong introduction. Don't argue your points in the introduction. That's where you get our attention. You end with a thesis statement, new paragraph. That's your first main point. Same thing with the conclusion. You don't need to say the thesis was, here's a main point, here's a main point, here's a main point. You can kind of give that big, broad brushstroke restatement and that re-sharing, okay? But we don't need to tick off every single point as if you're reading the outline to us. Definitely run spell check. Definitely run that grammar check. Definitely share it with somebody who's like, hey, how am I doing? What does this look like, right? Like the better you can make this, the easier that final draft's going to be. This is supposed to be in what? APA style, right? APA style. So what does that mean? You're going to have the cover page. You're going to have that title, your name, the class name, my name, the date, and that's going to be centered vertically on the page. You're going to have the page numbers in the top right corner. Okay. Next page, you're going to start with the title and go. Now, you may use section headers. That is perfectly acceptable. I am okay with that. If you don't want to use section headers, that is okay as well. Um, but again, if you do the section headers, you're going to have those bolded over there. You're going to have them bolded so they stand out in between your points, right? So we know we've moved from one point to the next. Okay. You're going to use APA in-text citations, right? So when you pull in one of your sources, you have that paraphrase, you have that quote, right? You have that in-text citation, so we know, oh, let me go down to my reference page and I can find out what that is, right? Okay, so please make sure you're using that APA reference. Those are cheap, easy points. Okay, one thing that you and I said this in the video when I talked about APA style, and I'll remind you again. If you look up any kind of APA reference, you're going to see like an abstract page. Okay, you're going to see an abstract page. That is okay if you would like to do that. I am not requiring an abstract page, okay, but you may use one in there if you so choose. And then you're going to submit your draft here. I do like to remind you, look at the rubric, right? What is it looking for? That thesis statement, right? The effective use of the research, that you've pulled in those sources, that you not only just say it, but you explain it, right? Like, how does this back up my claim or my position? That you have a really good organization, that you have strong appeals, that you really are being persuasive, you're connecting with the audience, and you're making a good case. All right. Documentation. Remember, these are free, cheap points, 10 points, up to 10 points just for having it in the right style, right? And then proofreading and editing. Okay. Making sure, again, that you're doing that kind of work, right? Between those two, proofreading and style is 15 points of your 75, right? So there's a significant number of points there that are pretty straightforward and pretty easy to do. Then we also are going to submit a copy of this to this discussion board, okay, so that others will be able to peer review you, right? All you have to do is submit it. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to review anybody. You don't have to read anybody else's work yet, right? Just submit the copy so that we can get you directed to the next piece. Okay. Guys, I got to tell you, I mean, this again, I've said it several times in this video. I'm going to remind you again. This is a super important module, right? Like, a lot of how you end will be determined by how you do this module. So really take the time, focus on that draft, make it your best possible message. If you need help, make sure you're reaching out to me. Emailing me is the best approach. But if you need something, let me know so that I can get that to you. Good luck, everybody.